Sometimes work is created because things need to be seen or revealed. Sometimes it needs to be created because it is the only place I have voice in a world that has actively sought to erase. And sometimes it's great responsibility, and sometimes it's just out of necessity and need to bring something to the world or to envision something or help to show people that there's other ways.
One night with the moonlight above, I found you in dreams. Our heart was the sea. One night with the moonlight above, I found you in dreams. We're swimming and free. That time the stars in the sky fell full of light. Remember, stars in the sky fell full of light.
Welcome back to Fresh Off the Spaceship. I'm Larry Mizell Jr., DJ, writer, and your guide in this podcast.
And I'm your co-host, Martin Douglas, back from outer space.
We gotta put like an echo or something on that. We're also gonna be joined this week by KEXP's Gabriel Teodros, who you'll hear from later on. Gabriel's a DJ who does the early show. He's gonna be in conversation with us as well as doing one of the interviews. Through each episode of this podcast, we're delving into the story of the Black Constellation. On the last episode, we shared the story of Just Moni. If you haven't listened back to that or the previous episodes, highly advise you clear some space out and check them out.
On this week's episode, we're digging into the work and life of Nicholas Galanin, conceptual visual artist, activist, and the musical force behind projects such as Ya Tseen, Indian Agent, and Silver Jackson.
Now, if you've been following us through this series, you've heard the phrase continuum mentioned again and again, an idea that carries on forever, from generation to generation, from artist to artist into infinity. Continuum isn't just something that happens, it's something that's carried, something that manifests itself in tradition or passing down stories and talents. For Ishmael Butler, one way it comes through is how he's fostered artists in his community, many of whom would go on to become part of the Black Constellation. For Makoyo Ali Barnes, it's accepting that you're part of a confluence, aligning the future with the past and vice versa. Just Moni experiences Continuum by literally serving as a vessel for her ancestors through her performance. For Nicholas Galanin, Continuum is core to his being. Being of both Tlingit and Unangax heritage, Galanin's work is concerned with serving his community and creating space for their voices, art, and culture in a world that has intentionally tried to strip it away. Now, most of the stories you've heard on this podcast so far have grounded themselves in the city of Seattle. But to really tell this story, we'll need to go up further along the northwest to Nick's home of Sitka, Alaska. In the year 2012, a group I was in called Don't Talk to the Cops got booked for the festival HomeSkillet Fest, based in Sitka, Alaska. Curated and organized by Nicholas Galanin. A whole contingent of us from Seattle arrived in Sitka and decamped from the hotel, checking out the town and the grounds where the festival would be going on. It was overcast, the air was crisp, the water was cold. A really beautiful place, striking, true Northwest. Felt unspoiled in a way that I don't feel in Seattle. On that trip, there was Mad Rad, Kingdom Crumbs. I know DJ Astronomar, who was based in Seattle at the time, but is from Juneau, was there.
I loved what was happening with all the music coming from the community. And for me, it was just really a time where I got to appreciate all that and like try to like just not only getting artists up to our community, but to create a space to share and bring people together surrounding that.
Gabriel Teodros, one of the many Seattle artists who've made the trip to Sitka, described his experience at HomeSkillet as a testament to Nick's generosity.
I met Nicholas Galanin in 2007 for the first time. He flew Abyssinian Creole, my first group up, to do the HomeSkillet Festival in Sitka, Alaska. And I had no idea who this guy was. Every single year, he brought up different hip-hop artists from Seattle. And my first impressions of Nicholas Galanin are something that I still think about when I'm listening to his art today. He was so open. He was so giving. He was one of the kindest, most thoughtful festival organizers I'd ever worked for. This is a story I've never told anyone, but there was a member of one of the bands who will remain nameless that was upset about, I can't remember if they were upset about the time of the stage that they were on or something. They were upset about something. And because of this, something that had happened, they weren't able to sell any of their merchandise. Nicholas Galanin and his family bought all of their merchandise and all of our merchandise too, just even though we weren't tripping, and then ended up giving it away for free to people in the community.
To be honest, I was expecting like some super fan type dude who loved Seattle hip hop. You know what I mean? Because occasionally you get those guys, and it's like no knock on anybody that's supportive, but it wasn't like that. Like, this guy was cool and just loved and wanted to support and bring that vibration out to his community and show people what was going on out there. I didn't even realize he was such a deep artist. I thought this was a guy who's been running this label, has this festival going, and has been holding it down where he's from for years. And I had a beautiful time there. The community, the people that came out. I remember there was an artist from Hawaii, and they were just kind of talking about that Hawaii-Alaska connection. And that kind of gave me this idea of continuum between these indigenous communities. And there were just all these experiences I had in a couple days I was there that just kind of opened me up a little bit, bit by bit. And we all had a fantastic time, everybody who came out that year. So my understanding of his generosity and his well of inspiration to draw on was profound. When I talked to him yesterday, the day before, he was like, that wasn't a job. Wasn't making money on that. It's a literal labor of love.
I don't think he could have with the way he bought all of our merch.
You know what I'm saying? That's crazy. But I'm surprised.
Life is your medicine through the rain or the shine. Life is your medicine. This goes out from 206 and 718 residents. Life is your medicine. Life is your medicine.
Otis Calvin III, known to many as OC Notes, also has fond memories of visiting Alaska for the festival.
Never been to Alaska Music Festival. Come on. You know what I'm saying? So I went, and it was so fun. Like, I had the time of my life, man. It just was magic for me, dog, because, like, in my family, we got Muskogee Creek Native roots down there. My indigenous people are very important to me. I'd never take for granted anytime I'm allowed to be embracing anyone's culture, you know what I'm saying? But when it comes to, like, cultures of indigenous natives of any land, it just means a lot to me to be embraced, you know what I'm saying? And so when I went there, I realized just how much they were doing for us, bro. And even now, man, it chokes me up. It was special, bro. And Alaska is like, it's magic. Sitka is magic. It's everywhere. I ain't never been around so many bald eagles in my life. Ravens, I've never, size of cats. Going on boats, seeing fish jumping out the water. You know, I'm just like, I just immediately wanted to live there. And he was just like, yeah, come back anytime. I was like, for real? He's like, yeah. So I took him seriously.
It's not just the festival that's so compelling, but Sitka itself, something Nick holds closely.
It's not something I can look at and hold and say, this is what it is. It's just, it's like understanding. And it's a connection that is felt. It's a connection that's understood. It's a place amongst everything in this world. It's a place that brings a closer sense of all of that than anything else I could get, like anywhere, you know. This place, the power of it, the land, the sea, all of that stuff. And for me, that's like true connection. We come from it. We're part of it, you know.
Through events like HomeSkillet, Nick's been able to share some of this majesty with his fellow artists and his Black Constellation cohorts. Even outside of the fest, Nick has been known to invite friends to come spend time with him at his home for musical collaborations, also just to experience his daily artistic practice.
Our routine in Alaska is like, you know, wake up, bang. We're doing some sort of art stuff, man. Like whether it's music, nowadays he's real active with the carving. So he'll be out working on a canoe. There was a time when he was doing a totem pole. He's, you know, and I've been out there and then come back working on music. Then at night, bro, we're cooking food, having a fire, just chilling out, drinking some beers. Like this is the life, dog. Go on a boat, you feel me? Might be out with some folks. What are folks doing? Might pull out a guitar, playing some songs, man. Like...
I remember my impressions of Sitka were like, this is what the Northwest, this is what Seattle would be like if white people never really touched it, right? Yeah. And they had bald eagles the way we have seagulls, and they had ravens the way we have crows.
Right.
And I remember Khalil and Waylon, you know, once we caught up, they were just telling me about their day. They were like, yo, this brother that brought us here, his family has been on this land for 10,000 years. Literally, you know what I mean?
While Nick's home base is in Sitka, Seattle became a natural gateway for him as he expanded in his work.
Alaska, to go anywhere in the world, we generally have to fly through Seattle. That's our, you know, that's the first city that we have access to like the rest of the world through, especially out of like Southeast Alaska. Also, you know, it's still Northwest. We still share like indigenous cultures that have traveled down the line of these coastal communities. There's a lot of familiarity to those cultures, even though they're different communities. You know, we share similar visual languages and evolutions of that, and even how we sustain ourselves on the land.
From another world.
I come from a lineage of artists, so my father, my uncle, and then just my culture. My great-grandfather was a carver here in a time when carving was not necessarily allowed in our communities, or, you know, it was heavily, purposefully removed as a language from our hands.
Nick's grandfather was master carver George Benson. His father and his uncle worked with jewelry and metals. It was in the tradition of his elders where he began to learn the skills he would refine as a visual artist.
My father, he taught me what love for music was. Like, that was his thing. I sensed importance from music by, you know, seeing how much it meant to his life. He bought us all guitars at like 13, something like that. And then the art side of things too. I came up just studying cultural art form and the visual language through my family, like through my father, my uncle.
From his father, he learned not only artistic practices, but a spirit of generosity and moral support.
We just had my father's life celebration here, and it was so wonderful to hear people talk stories of how he impacted, you know, others. And he was a generous man, like always. And not only was he a generous man, he was also supportive throughout, being like, if I had an idea or something, he'd be like, do it, you know? He wasn't a parent that's like shutting shit down or like trying to be pessimistic about whatever, or, you know, he says, yeah, you could do that, do it. And that was in light of even saying like how, while I was studying in New Zealand, that feeling of mentors wanting you to succeed and stuff was important. But his generosity was definitely, I feel like, what had lived on.
Out of sentiment, I noticed that the way I talk to you is wrong. I don't need a reason when the feeling's gone. Mostly you just sound like an angry song. Used to be our love, but I'm sure it's gone. Gone like when the movie ends, the credits on. Silence light, end of the song.
Parenthood is more or less an extension of how our parents raised us, or how they didn't raise us. Sometimes it's an extension, sometimes it's a reaction. Nick became a father while he was running a label, curating a music festival, and traveling all over the world for his artistic practice. Throughout the challenges of having such a busy lifestyle, Nick was still able to raise his kids with love and an ability to support their curiosity.
Talk to me about being a dad. When did you become a father?
Oh, man. Nova was born in 2006. Supernova gets a driver's license next month. So,
what was going on in your life?
That was right when HomeSkillet was starting and stuff. So, Nova, Scarlett, Elliot grew up in a time where I was traveling all the time too. And I was on the road at almost every 2 weeks sometimes, for speaking, teaching, whatever. I realized how much travel had been taking place, especially after COVID. It really put a slow down on that, right? I think it's been 2 years and I've traveled way less. I like staying put, even though it's good to get out every now and then. But being a parent was huge. Responsibility and love, understanding the importance of everything for me was, into these children and to what they are able to carry and also, absorb or catch from the work that's happening. They've been around all this stuff forever, and they're allowed to come and post up in the synth space station and power up the synths, our drum machines. They're allowed to come pick up a carving knife and do those things. So they make jewelry, they do. So they're just surrounded by these things, and it's not pushed on them in a sense. It's like it's here though.
Does that kind of mirror how it was for you growing up?
Yeah, definitely. My pops would let us sit at his jeweler's bench. I was 14 and make my mom some earrings or something for whatever, Christmas or what, But there was a lot of lessons happening in that time. And there's a lot of my other mentors, my uncle Will Burkhart, who I still work with and I'm learning from. And in this practice, you're not learning a process. You're learning other things like why and connections and you learn about the world, beyond the world even. And Tlingit culture, supernatural, and the connections to place and histories. So, you can travel through forward and backwards in time with work. And that's, I think that's what's really being conversed and shared.
Yeah. That really reminds me of something MAB said when we were talking. That was in the episode we did with him. We talked about the purpose of all these things, and I think it was in context of kind of some of the Black sovereignty movement his parents were up in. The purpose of these things is to give us a more realistic and holistic understanding of who we are, right?
Yeah. And for me, it's not to take from something. It's to give to it, to contribute to it. It continues through those teachings with your, with children, with students, whatever.
I think I told you this before, and this is such a tiny mundane detail, but it really made me understand the scope of the context that you provide your family. You were smoking something, like some meat, you know what I'm saying? And you had, like the stickers they have in the grocery store. It's like pork, chicken, or whatever, a little orange sticker. But you had them, they were in Tlingit, I believe.
Oh, yeah, I had those made up. living here, we process and, harvest a lot of what we eat. So that means my children butcher deer and they fillet fish, all these things. And we put them away, and so those labels were all, the Tlingit words. So I don't speak the language. I didn't grow up speaking it. My father understood it and was in an era, came from a time where it was, his grandparents said, we don't want you to speak this. All you need to know is who your grandparents' clan crests, where they come from are, and their names and your name. And that's, he had memories of understanding the language as a child, and then it just kind of, that was taken, that generation from us. So for me, understanding how connected all this is, how connected language is to everything, I do take time and effort to integrate it into some of my work, even as a form of learning, for myself. So, and my children too. So it's what we do.
I am the light. I am burning inside within. Grateful out there, my friends. Grateful this love is here.
Do you love having this big pack?
Oh yeah, it's wild. It's really wild because they're growing up. Like they're just big. It's like adults, man, filling the living room.
Right.
They're all helpful. They all like wake up and, do whatever they need to do around the house without even being asked. They all come out and help with, if we're doing fish or any of that stuff. So they're capable. They're really capable.
As someone who came from a modest economic background, Nick understands the importance of being able to provide for his children. But raising his kids is about much more than just making sure his kids are taken care of financially. There's the notion of being present, both emotionally and physically.
We grew up raised by wolves. We didn't have much. We didn't have we had mixed milk and cornflakes, top ramen. Just didn't have much at all. But more importantly, I feel like than any type of, material or anything, I think is, giving them an understanding that they can grow and be what they need to be in this world without me making it any harder for them or without any of that sort of thing. And then just providing a home and a space where they can access things. So I also realized the challenge of that a lot of working in this world might bring into conversations like this. And for me, it's time. It's all right, how much time are they going to be able to, have with you when you're out here traveling the globe or doing these, these things. And then obviously it's different for everyone's family situation, but if you throw in custody or any other sort of conversations, time gets cut in half immediately if you're lucky. Yeah, so goes quick, man.
Fatherhood being a powerful motivator, Nick's learned a very important aspect of preserving his time and energy as an artist.
I don't know if we get better at being a little more graceful in graceful with our time, I suppose. I'm so optimistic to a fault. But I can do this. Yeah, I'll get it. I'll get that. For sometimes, it's a luxury to be able to say no. And
you tell him.
And then learning to say no to projects or to things, your time also is something that's, important. So
very much so. Super hard lesson for me, man. I had to learn because I yesed myself damn near off the building. You know what I'm saying? For Nick, his art isn't just about self-expression. It speaks to and for his community.
I'm curious, man, like what do you hope people get from your art more than anything else?
I mean, there's so many different types of work that come through creative process. You know, some of this work is created for the community, like my community here, strictly for it, whether it's ceremonial use, whether it's cultural use. And within that aspect of the conversation, it's say this canoe, for example. You know, I'm learning and participating in something that's very specialized in process and understanding of, you know, working with material, in this case, a tree, red cedar tree that's older than America, and working closely with it over the course of a year to transform it into a vessel that carries our community, that is powered by our community, that is, you know, and that's just the actual use of it. But if we talk about the tool making, the stories, the involvement of even bringing elders into the conversations surrounding the process and the work, and it opens up a whole other thing. And alongside that, training apprentices to do the same again is all, you know, deeply wrapped up in this.
Do you ever receive like any, I guess, like pushback from your community or different family members?
Sure. I mean, who doesn't, I suppose? And if you're not receiving that, what are you doing?
Right.
Like going with the flow?
Yeah,
I don't know about that. Yeah. I don't want to go with the flow. Look where it's at. Look where it leads you. So like, look what world it generally shapes and creates. Like, so yeah, I think it's all part of it.
He also felt pushback in his academic pursuits. Traveling abroad to study fine art in college, he received his Bachelor's of Fine Arts in Jewelry Design and Silversmithing at London Guildhall University, and would later earn a Master's of Fine Arts in Indigenous Visual Art from Massey University in New Zealand.
Yeah, I was in London and legitimately told me that you can't do this work here. It's too literal, they said, like the native language in that space. And yeah, it's like, all right. I kept like a sketchbook of ideas on work that I'd never brought into my mentors and school program at the university there. It wasn't for them. I opened it up when I went to New Zealand, and I was in a space that was like, yeah, this is okay. You can do this stuff here. But that's an extension of, it's literally an extension of residential schools, of not being able to carry any of your culture into that space. You got to hang it up at the door.
While in London, Nick also got a crash course in a more affirming cultural education through its music.
I lived in East London, in Hackney, and I would always tune into like the pirate radio stations. You'd just be driving and you'd hear like the airwaves take over, and this was like, you know, early Dizzy Rascal, before Dizzy was even like on the scene or anything.
When Nick left London, he made his way to New Zealand and encountered a far more supportive environment, willing to engage with his calling to preserve his culture through the arts.
I left and went to New Zealand, where I studied on a program for was Maori visual arts, and so now it was, you know, led by Maori Robert Yonke, who's, you know, a bridge to culture and institution and contemporary art and contemporary forms and ways of thinking, and for me that was really, you know, a lot changed. I felt like I was supported. I felt like I was in a space where they wanted me to succeed, you know, and I was able and allowed to pursue these conversations that are, you know, now foundational to a lot of the practice I continue to do still in these spaces. So as a lot of the art I do create now. So
yeah, that's beautiful, man. Like even connecting like with Maori to y'all up in Sitka, like that's a dope connection.
So yeah, like I'm saying though, we speak about the constellation, we speak about these things. We have we can go to a lot of places, and our indigenous communities across the globe have faced a lot of this same challenges that capitalistic colonial worlds place onto us. So
now that Nick's art has gained broader notoriety, he's found himself entering spaces that previously neglected to properly acknowledge indigenous communities, such as Ivy League schools.
There's so much engagement in institutions here that we do that, initially they wouldn't have us.
Yeah.
Now we're invited to speak to their students and their, so it's, there's a lot of irony in some of that, especially in the education system. I feel like with higher education, the politics and the issues and the histories of even whose land,
right,
and how that land was acquired, but what's being taught and those systems. So it is important to be in that space and to have a voice in it, but it's also I didn't go to Ivy League school,
right,
but now I'm the curriculum. So and it's not necessarily the historical curriculum that we were before through anthropology. It's like the now. So
After a short break, we'll explore how Nick's art contributed to one of the most pivotal moments in the Black Constellation's history. When the constellation took form, the union was solidified in 2014 by a monumental exhibition at the Frye Museum in Seattle titled Your Feast Has Ended. It featured striking, emotionally significant visual works from Nick, from Mekoyo, and Nep Sidhu, capturing the poignancy of their respective bodies of work in a way that's equally majestic and confrontational.
A lot of things were changing in the world and even in the especially even Seattle art scene. I think that for me felt like a real pivotal moment in a lot of ways with our collective voices and work and collaborations. And it just kind of kept going from there, like we weren't done. We weren't done with our work that we have to do. And it's expanded as it needs to.
Martin, Gabriel, and I sat to discuss the impact, not only the work featured in the exhibit, but the very idea of taking over that museum space.
Coming from where I'm from, I didn't always have a positive association with museum. Some of the earliest museums I went to were not contemporary art museums. They were places that just felt like theft. Like this is a colonizer's hall of things that they've stolen from all over, and particularly with indigenous folks from up north. And stepping into the Frye, Your Feast Has Ended, just seeing like this beautiful conversation of Black, Indigenous, South Asian art that went against colonization in many different forms. And it was the first time I ever saw a museum that can also be a place of healing.
I was absolutely taken aback. Incredible stuff. Really powerful, really wry and lyrical. You know what I'm saying? The way he would title stuff, like he's got that one thing that I believe, if I'm not mixing them up, it's the bear skin rug. It's a bear hide. Its claws and its teeth are bullets, right? And it's got, is part of it an American flag? I want to say.
I remember seeing something like that.
Yeah, and it was called The American Dream is Alive and Well. I remember reading that and I was like, hold up. And all of his stuff is titled so coldly, It's just like bars. So he just brings this really wry, sharp thing, but he's not like some, you know, cutting sharper or no, he is very sharp, but he's not like he's not Dick.
Nah.
He's very gentle, deep, like genuine, tender dude who's just really, really on his shit. And there isn't a single piece of art I've seen Nicholas make that didn't shake me up to some degree.
Yeah. What I will say is that some of the most tender, gentle, kind people in the world save that sort of energy for these systems that oppress us as people.
Real. Yeah.
Yeah, I see that in his art for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I always remember about Your Feast Has Ended is being greeted with those arrows when you walk in.
Yes.
Those were hard.
And I mean, what a statement in that.
Yeah.
Arrows pointing at you when you walk in.
Yeah.
And just the like very punk rock kind of spirit of subversiveness in his work. The police armor and the crucifix with the Starbucks cups that like looks like they've been filled with blood kind of in a pile at the feet.
The statement, like, your feast has ended, and we're walking in and these arrows are coming at you.
Mm-hmm.
And like it was like I get goosebumps like thinking about it. You know what I mean? Like that was the very first time, and I told Makoyo this back in the day too. That was the very first time I felt like there was a museum exhibit that just centered us. So like it felt like it was for us, like as people of color in the world. You know what I mean? And it was profoundly healing, like to be able to go to a museum and not feel like we're on display in some fetishization. You know what I mean? Like,
which is
it's normally what happens.
For sure.
This is some of the illest art you've ever seen from Black folks, from South Asians, from Indigenous folks, and it's a clap back against empire. We're clapping against colonization and white supremacy and all this shit, and we're centering everything that's beautiful in our culture and the ways that our cultures interact. And it was just one of the most fire things I've ever seen in a museum.
And speaking of Nick, Nep, and Makoyo, curator, writer, healer Negara Kudumu expresses a point that shines through in the work of all three artists.
You know, the one thing I have to say, particularly about these three, they're not afraid of the hard conversations.
Nah.
They're not afraid of the hard conversations. They can speak very resolutely and very calmly and will go toe to toe with you about both the aesthetics and the conceptual aspects. But then also they will have a glass of champagne with you at dinner.
While Nick was garnering acclaim for his visual art, he was also creating music. Always wanting to take things into his own hands, he slowly built out a truly incredible studio that he calls the Spaceship.
I've seen pictures of the Spaceship, as you call it, your studio.
Yeah, it's a spaceship. It's a spaceship because once you get in there, you leave this world in a different way. Like your access to sonics and the sound and time is not time can go like be an abstract thing in that place.
Mm-hmm. I definitely think the evolution of the spaceship is huge. Just being up there most recently and seeing it, there's so much to learn, and it has such a huge effect on the creative process. You know what I'm saying? Because those devices aren't just pretty objects that are expensive. Like they really, when you connect them and learn about them the way that you're supposed to and apply them, it really changes the game. So it actually is important, at least to me, as you know, applying to what you say about going forward, like to be up there and using those things, using those tools, because they're massive tools. You know, feel me? It's like trying to build a rocket with fucking the shit you're supposed to use to build a rocket, or using just some DeWalt shit you buy from Home Depot, little kit. Like, I want the rocket builder shit, you know what I mean?
The spaceship itself is symbolic of Nick's process and ethos he brings to his music. Always changing, always growing, and always defying boundaries.
I think we feel similar about labels and genres, how we don't really need them. But I'm curious for people that wonder, like, how would you describe your music? Because I feel like it's hard to classify or put in a box. You know what I mean?
I mean, that's one description.
Yeah.
we can start there.
Word.
Yeah, that's probably one of the better descriptions of it, I think. So, like, it's free. I always think, like, for me, the term that I like to use is like sovereign creativity, where it's this, not being reactionary, not moving to fill a certain genre or this or that, but just doing what needs to be made or what comes through. And with that, I don't know what the next project will sound like. That's all right. I don't know what the next visual art project's going to be, and that's okay.
In 2008, he started his first official project under the moniker Silver Jackson.
Of all around me, she's been by my side. Chased away dearly, these dreams dark and fun. Hello, my lover, I must say goodbye. 'Cause you ask only questions, never and why.
The earliest Silver Jackson recordings began as acoustic, meditative folk songs, but you could already hear him taking the genre, breaking it apart, fiddling around in the studio, layering his vocals. And with each new release, he'd venture out further into the ether, bringing in new voices, instruments, and ideas.
When did you start making music as Silver Jackson?
Probably 2008 or so. Started just like messing around in the little home studio, and for me, I was just trying to figure things out, like the ideas and the process I loved, and yeah, it just started from there, and it was highly collaborative always. I always feel like for me, music there's a alchemy that happens through collaboration that can't really happen without it, in a sense. So I feel like I'm always open to that. Like, I feel like it's a necessity, and so it's like, it'd be harder for me to revisit a project if it was just my hands on it only,
right?
Musically, and my voice or whatever. Bringing others into it is I feel like it provides even longevity, at least from my eyes of listening to it again later.
Nick released the last Silver Jackson LP, Starry Skies, Opened Eyes, in 2014, but it was far from the end of his pursuits. Nick morphed the project into something new as he linked up with musicians Zach Dylan Wass and Constellation member O.C. Notes.
Starry Skies, Open Eyes was the last Silver Jack record. And I don't know, I probably collaborated with Otis, O.C. Notes, on a few records prior to that, here and there, and just started going further into that space. And I don't actually remember how the initial project happened. I feel like we were just in the studio, and we ended up like creating so much material and ideas that we're like, let's put this out on a new project. And that's where, Indian Agent at the time was more of a small run of bringing light to historical, the role of the Indian Agent historically. Where they're like terrible enforcers of colonial government, and part of it was bringing light to that, part of it was bringing people together, part of it was flipping that. So yeah, some of the songs were definitely heavier and a little darker, I think.
As you heard Nick allude to, the term Indian Agent was an appointed position by the U.S. government in the late 1700s for an individual to live among tribes, to essentially guide them through assimilation into Western culture. But really, what they were was enforcers of oppression, overseeing the literal and figurative destruction of their culture and physical bodies. Nick and the group's adopting of the name was intended to undo the pain Indian agents caused and replace it with purpose and peace. But after releasing the group's only album, Meditations in the Key of Red, Nick was again ready to take the project in a different direction.
You know, Indian Agent was a very particular moment. It was a very particular idea, and we're always pushing forward artistically with our work, with our engagement in the world. Our Indian Agent was bringing to light some historical realities that our communities still face today. And it was, you know, bringing those conversations to this space of music and performance and gathering. You know, we still have those underlying political conversations in our work, in this music and in this record. We'll always have that voice. And for me, I think it was important to not carry that name further. You know, we picked it up and we spoke about it and we did our project based on that and we set it down. The next step for us was Ya Tseen Indian Yard, which is just speaking on a lot of different levels of how important love is, for one thing, to our communities and to our work. One thing I noticed about the conversations in this record and stuff is that, you know, there's this idea of performative revolution to response of oppression that certain communities expect us to be, as in, but the reality is our revolution can happen however it needs to happen, when it happens in our own time, while we're caring for ourselves still, while we're caring for our families still, while we're nurturing and tending to those things, you know. So, and I think that this record holds a lot of that.
Nick began to transition the project away from Indian Agent and began work with a new name, Ya Tseen. The name translates to be alive and also references Nick's Tlingit name, Ya Tseen. The project also marked the beginning of a relationship with Sub Pop Records, the same label that had put out records from other Constellation-affiliated groups like Shabazz Palaces and The Satisfaction. It was a move that was years in the works after first getting connected with Sub Pop's co-founder, Jonathan Poneman.
I met Jonathan Poneman at the Feast show, actually. Your Feast is in it. It was at the opening or something. And let's see, I think my friend Skin introduced me to him. And
Red Skin.
Yeah,
man.
Red Skin introduced me to JP. He's like, hey, that's JP over there. So, want to meet him? I'm like, sure. We go over there and like just start chopping it up, and I think we stayed in touch. I gave him a Starry Skies vinyl. There's only 100 of those. I don't know if there's any around anymore. I'd like to find some. And he said he wanted to do a project. That was in like 2014 or something.
Right.
And fast forward to here we are.
Ya Tseen released their first record, Indian Yard, on Sub Pop in 2021.
I kind of learned a lot on this last record. I always learn a lot on any project, I suppose, in certain ways. And for me, it was, you know, it's always interesting in retrospect to look back at any musical project and, you know, visit what those songs might mean over time, or what they, you know, how things distill. And I feel like that those sort of things shape the next project in ways that we don't really know yet.
Your lips on mine.
I peeped the Silver Jackson stuff, and I was digging it. I peeped the Indian Asian stuff, and I was like, oh, okay, I like where this is going. You know what I mean? And I like you working with Otis, and I was like, wow, they have a really cool dynamic. And that Ya Tseen record takes it to a whole other level, and my appreciation of it is just deepening all the time. Like the kind of, and it's ill because me thinking of Nick as this really ill, subversive artist, you know what I mean? Not even subversive. That implies that you are centering this thing that you gotta like take out, right? But musically, the Ya Tseen stuff, it's just, I can tell he's coming from a place that isn't tripping on, you know what I mean, empire, like we talked about. I mean, there's songs that address that, but it's like just a dope, like rock, pop, you know, whatever genres you're gonna classify and slot it into. It's extremely well written and produced, played, really, really dope. And I remember thinking for years, because there was this conversation, this understanding that Jonathan Poneman was very interested in what Nicholas was doing. And the Ya Tseen record, I was like, yes, this is like a really, this is the fruit of the perfect fruit for them to be like serving to the world. It makes a lot of sense. It kind of reminded me of how like Stas and Kat did these independent releases. They're always like, when we do this record on Sub Pop, it's going to be like another level. And Nicholas tapped into like a whole other thing. It's not a different thing for him, you know what I mean? But he surprised me, and he continues to surprise me, and that's what we want from our artists, right?
Absolutely.
Yep. 100%. And yeah, like I think about the evolution from Silver Jackson, which the early recordings, you know, sound like some folk rock straight off of Ballard Ave, you know what I mean? And then it kind of, it evolves into something different to where you get like this beautiful fusion of music in the Indian Agent record. And then like Ya Tseen just kind of blows the roof off of like the whole catalog of what, you know, Nicholas has been doing as a musician. And the thing that strikes me about Indian Yard is the sequencing. It's beautiful because it starts off as like a pop record.
Right.
And there are like these shifts, like it goes into like a really soulful song, like Born into Rain, that like James Blake couldn't write if he tried, to be honest.
Right.
Hold me like a promise made of glass, broken by the demons of our past. Oh, I wanna hear the reason that you thought we'd have it all. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. I was born into the rain, but somehow died under your sun. Lost, but somehow thought that we had won. Do you wanna hear the reason that I thought we'd have it all? It's not your fault. It's not your fault.
And you see, Badu was stricken by that and had to do that cover. she's worn a lot of stuff that Nicholas has made, and it is a collaboration because she's modeled some of these incredible new things he's been working on, like those silver nail covers that are inscribed so ill.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's incredible writing all over that record. I love the sequencing too, Martin. The beginning of that record, it sounds like something that like, and I'm not saying this like, it's not a diss when I say this, but it sounds like something The Weeknd could do. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
But
absolutely,
with like a lot more heart and depth. It's my money, you know? And that's incredible because it's not easy to write some pop shit.
Nah.
It's not. And then you go through the record and it's just beautiful and soulful. And by the time you get to the end, it's like that's when the weird comes out. It's like they've got Ish and Stas on Synthetic Gods, just ripping it. And I like how at the end of Ish's verse, they get his patterns get slower and more offbeat. I thought that was a really good touch.
On him, I'm like, oh yes. Devil, you expose, you a go, you can't protest. I'ma just try to crack your melon if you go vest. I'm the one that's gonna do more, but I said less. The God left the lessons on my dresser with the compressor. You wanna be the flame.
And then you got Tayshawn dropping bombs on Gently to the Sun.
Up here closer to the sun, there are no cops or rocks through sunny shots. No stuttering apologies and slow for the harmonies. No mother on her knees wondering why a child was shot on a narrow street. We look down and can't see a thing. It's almost like equality. Up here there's just an empty echo through space, and we follow its new possibilities gently to the sun.
And oh my God, that final track where, you know, it's rapping in Tlingit.
Yeah.
Like, that's fucking crazy.
Yeah. Putting it out on a high level in the music sphere via this highly regarded label, obviously, with the majors resources and everything. What an accomplishment. And it feels like that record in particular, all those guests you just mentioned, it's like the trajectory of everything he'd been doing that I'd seen since I met him. People who he brought out to Sitka, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yep.
Are now on this record. It's a really beautiful full circle kind of thing.
Like, we are a part of nature and we are meant to be a part of it. We're meant to be integrated with it. So to take the mentality that we destroy it, so we need to protect it and quarantine it off somewhere else, it's like separating ourselves from it further. The key more of it is like reestablishing like a healthier connection to it. And I started to think like our Earth, the entire Earth is like the basis of everything that we are. But that the language of the Earth is something that we've forgotten how to listen to. It doesn't stop communicating with us, but we have stopped listening.
Whether it's in his musical work, his community work, or his exhibitions, Nick's work often intersects with his work as an activist. Most recently, he made headlines with his Palm Springs installation at Desert X, titled Never Forget. The project included huge 45-foot letters spelling out the words Indian land, like the Hollywood sign.
That was a 3-year project. I feel like it's coming from the community and history, culture, and community. Even living here in my ancestral homelands is a form of resistance, because if you look at all historical colonial histories, documents, actions, they didn't want us here. All of the system was designed to remove every aspect of our being, spiritually, our language, our children, our land, our rights, our, every form. And the receipts for that are everywhere. They're in these museum institutions still. They're in our history books. They're in the language that we don't speak or we do speak. They're in the place names that have been removed or replaced. So the work I do, when it's connected to any of that, it's going to come through at some point as a surface of political or activism, etc. Yes, some of it is utilizing intentionally, having a voice, doing it out of responsibility for being able to have a platform or space. And some of it happens naturally.
Larry had the chance to head down to California and see the sign for himself.
It's deep. This is how Nick works. Everything has got levels. And yeah, I was out I think I went out to Palm Springs. It was after the opening. I wish I could have gone to that, but had to go check that out. Went out there, and I mean, it's big. It's really big. It looks big when you look at the photos, but when you're there, you're like, damn, this is fucking huge. Imagine the labor, the materials, the planning, the licensing, the insurance, all that shit that has to be involved with all that. Now, I know there's got to be people helping with that when you're in this kind of festival situation, but still, it's a lot going into it. And yeah, Indian land splashed across this desert. And even that is a reference to, like you said, the Hollywood sign, but the Hollywood sign originally said Hollywood land, right? Hollywood land was a early planned community that was basically like for whites. I don't even know if they said it like that, but that's what it was for.
Wow.
So that level of reference in this stuff is, I mean, very typical for him, but amazing as usual. It was literally an advertisement real estate developers put there to get people to move to this, probably not explicitly said, but, clean, white American community until that sign fell into disrepair. And then they kept it. They kept the Hollywood part, as an advertisement for our entertainment industrial complex. But it's really interesting that was an advertisement for segregation and, escaping Black and brown people. And Nick doesn't miss a trick, The
clapback is in effect.
Never Forget is just one supersized example of what Nick carries over into all of his work. He's all too aware of the structures and rewritten histories that got us to where we are now. His work is a reminder of what's been lost and is an active participant in reclamation.
I feel like that's part of my process and sharing work and stuff is it's so important to contextualize things. I watch and witness how detractive English language could be towards somebody if it wanted to be, through academia, through reductive, and so I feel like there's a battle of words and context oftentimes, and in ways of talking about this work, that's where it happens sometimes, in that space. It's like, all right, no, we don't we capitalize the word Indian. We capitalize the word Tlingit, the first letters of those. So it's these sort of things. They're subtle and they wear away at being aware of that and witnessing it it's real. To see it happen. It's like, damn, this is how it is. Okay.
Right.
Let's fix this real quick.
Right.
The red marker out.
Yeah, right. Because it's like the grades come to the desk. They really come.
Amnesia, intentional amnesia towards history, erasure, even these terms that are notoriously not used towards the building of America, like genocide. So stuff like that.
There's maybe this perceived notion that the artistic world is more progressive outside of the toxic traits and histories of our governments. But obviously, that's far from the case, and actively, they participate in this engine of erasure we've talked about on the podcast. When Nick was approached by the Whitney Museum of Modern Art in New York, he quickly found hypocrisy deep within the institution.
I didn't know much about the Whitney, to be honest, prior to being invited out there. And then realizing like, oh, people say this is, important. And like, okay. So go through the motions and do the things. And, what I was witnessing and seeing happen with the conversations surrounding, that particular biennial and the board and the political climate of the current U.S., at that time, everything was kind of aligned with each other in certain ways, where Candors, the board member that is in this space, owns and operates and profits off of the tear gas that was being shot at one of the artists in the Whitney that was, in Puerto Rico at the time. Or women and children at the border of Mexico, U.S. border at the time. Or Ferguson, all these spots. And these tools that people are clearly profiting on, and then, we're the recipients of that violence, or oftentimes. And so for me, it was easy. I was like, okay, we don't have a lot of these spaces move slow. They're dinosaurs. They have institutional memory that just like cannot be swayed. Generally speaking, the mechanisms are designed to continue that.
Nick initially moved ahead with an installation at the Whitney. His piece titled "Let the Men Are Dancing and Showing Their Faces" was featured at the front of the building.
Yeah, so it was entering in, and irony is the work that I had on the outside of that biennial on the building near the entrance was a piece titled "Let Them Enter Dancing and Showing Their Faces," and it was a monoprint of Ixt, which is a medicine man or woman. It was a medicine woman, and but the idea of letting them enter dancing, showing their faces, is from Tlingit cultures, when you'd enter a space and then you'd slowly reveal yourself to who's in there. And I feel like this work does that. It reveals, the visual work reveals the viewer's positions of where they're at in this world.
Ultimately, Nicholas and 7 other artists would remove their work from the Whitney.
There was conversations and letters being passed and all these like inactions that were, people trying to impact this institution and the boards, and nothing was really happening. You know how that goes with the governance in these places. So the next thing was like, just pull our work. And 4 of us did. I think 4 more followed. And, that was, it happened quick. And then the next day, it's like, even that, the impact was like, when like Fox News is trying to call your cell phone and shit.
Right.
So,
right.
It's like,
something's up.
Hey, I got a voice.
Yeah. There's a guy with a bow tie trying to FaceTime me right now. What's going on?
Yeah. It's wild, man.
Whether it's in his actions with the Whitney Biennale or just in the creation of his work, Nick is always concerned with speaking his truth and the truths of his community. His art is a corrective to the narratives and perceptions that get placed on Indigenous communities, perpetuated false narratives, or shallow understandings of his culture.
We get placed in boxes, we get boundaries placed around us that are attempts of defining, not only who we are, who we could be, but also our history. And I was, ultra aware of that as I studied this art form and continue to work within even my cultural side of the work I do. I started seeing all of these things. I started seeing stereotypes pushed upon, who or what is and what can be. I started seeing that impact, everything around. And I wanted to work from a place that was honest and real and revealing some of these things while also challenging them. And the challenging side of it was through demonstration and being it and showing what's possible, I suppose, in a world that always tends to detract from who we are.
The world we live in moves rapidly. but often feels resistant to the change that it needs. Nicholas's work in every incarnation holds a mirror to the past while reflecting towards the future. Next time on Fresh Off the Spaceship, we look at the work of prolific producer, DJ, songwriter, all-around renegade artist, O.C. Notes.
That's the way I do music is 100% spiritual, because at this point I don't do things like, oh, I want for a reason of like wanting to get something. I do it when I feel it. And so I know that if I'm moving off of a feeling, it's something that isn't technically coming from me. I'm moving with the vibration. I'm moving with other forces that influence me to do this thing.
This episode of Fresh Off the Spaceship was written, produced, and edited by Martin Douglas, Janice Headley, Dusty Henry, Isabel Khalili, and myself, Larry Mizell Jr. Audio was produced and mastered by Julian Martlew, with additional audio editing by Janice Headley. We want to thank Nicholas Galanin for giving us permission to feature his music in this episode, Gabriel Teodros for conducting additional interviews for this episode. Also, we just want to thank our volunteers, Elena Clark and Natalie Vinn, for their work transcribing interviews.
And we want to thank you, the listener. My name's Isabel Khalili. I'm one of the folks who's been working on this podcast, and I'm here to remind you that KEXP is listener funded. That means that the freedom we have to pursue projects like this podcast comes completely from the support of our community. And if you're here with us now, you're part of that community. So if you've enjoyed what you've heard so far and want to support the show, you can go to kexp.org/fresh. A one-time gift of $35 can make a huge difference. Or if you prefer to show your support in a different way, it would mean a lot to us if you shared this podcast with someone you think might enjoy it. And of course, leaving a rating, a review really helps other people find the podcast. So thanks again, and hope you can join us on the next episode to learn more about the artists of the Black Constellation.